This paper aims at showing the transgressive female body represented as a tool of rebellion against patriarchy. In the work Reinhold and Other Times, 1996, by the Polish writer Olga Tokarczuk, winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2018. For this purpose, I will examine Corn Spike, an eccentric female character, challenging gender stereotypes through her body, which is considered monstrous according to the androcentric perspective. Where? All right. In the patriarchal society, the perfect body has never been female. Since 400 BC, a hierarchical order was established to valorize men, the measure of all things. The scholar Rosi Braidotti remarks that in Western culture, the symbol of physical and therefore intellectual perfection has been embodied by the Vitruvian man, a model of humankind. His features have always been regarded as signs of an intrinsic superiority, while other minorities, such as women, have been not only considered inferior, but even less than human. According to some scholars, women's oppression seems to plunge its roots in a sort of inferiority complex developed by men, known as want envy, which is a sensation of threat and deficiency towards women's ability to give birth. Against this female empowerment, patriarchal society has imposed well-defined gender roles which mirror the bodies. If according to patriarchy, men should be, I quote, masculine, independent, invulnerable, tough, strong, aggressive, powerful, commanding, in control, rational, non-emotional, then following a dichotomous structure of patriarchy, I quote, real women, that is middle or upper middle class white women, are dependent, vulnerable, pliant, weak, supportive, nurturing, intuitive, emotional, and empathic, end quote. These characteristics were supposed to descend from the biological nature of women who throughout time have traditionally assumed the roles of mothers, nurturers, nurses. In contrast to this view lies The Over Bodies That Matter, 1996, by Judith Butler, in which the author deconstructs the biological determinism, divorcing the concepts of gender as a cultural construction from sex, which defines the individual's biological characteristics. As far as women of color are concerned, it is important to point out that their bodies have been perceived through a colonial mindset and considered animalistic, as the feminist scholar Story argues, and used, for instance, in the pornographic field. According to Anne Stoller, another feminist scholar, men stressed the difference between, I quote, who could bed and who could wed, end quote, promoting the social creation of a marriageable white woman based on the creation of an animalistic, morally loose, poor woman of color. However, although the animal comparison is particularly frequent with regard to Black women, many ecofeminists have shown that all women are exposed to strategies of oppression like animalization, which encourages the perception of their body as animal-like and therefore not human. Women have historically been captives in their own bodies, distorted by gender stereotypes, conveying ambiguous messages about them. On the one hand, they have been glorified in the wake of ideal pictures of goddesses worshipped by the whole community. On the other hand, they have been projections of shame, embarrassment, vexation, fear, and disgust. These attributes are constructed on the assumptions that the female body is conceived, I quote, both physically and mentally for procreation, or as is widely known, reproduction and for male pleasure, end quote. Consequently, many taboos have been created around menstruation, lactation, and sexual freedom, which are demonized because they express a kind of autonomy and power out of men's control. The restrictions imposed on this aspect aim precisely at imposing a domination over phenomena and characteristics associated with women, opposing men's stereotypes and patriarchal values. Since men are regarded as sexual subjects, women as objects seem to exist to please men, which explains female pressure about the marketing and consuming of their sexualized and objectified bodies. In this respect, in the 1970s and 1980s, Indian feminists showed serious concern for the degrading images of women, which led to a breaking point in 1987 with the Indecent Representation of Women Act, a document openly criticizing and condemning the humiliating representations of female bodies. Right. In opposition to these patriarchal stereotypes, women started to foreground a subversive agenda, to use the expression of scholar Savalan Meena Gopal, and perceive their body, I quote, as a resource, recognize their personhood and identity, then agency and empowerment come into play and women take possession of their body, end quote. As these feminists argue, I quote, dissatisfaction becomes an active process whereby women engage with their bodies, altering the discourse of feminine beauty and addressing the ambivalence directed towards their bodies, creating symbolic spaces for alternative identities, end quote. Along these lines, in her work, the popular scholar Lucy de Garay states that women cannot be freed without a complete transformation of the so-called symbolic order, corresponding to the hierarchical structure ordering all living beings, in which they do not recognize themselves. Precisely as Audre Lorde wrote, it is necessary to find new tools to dismantle the master body that could fairly represent them. In the article Irregularized Body Symbolic, 1991, the scholar Margaret Whitford underlines how the well-known images proposed by Rigaray in When Our Lips Speak Together, 1980, and An Ethics of Sexual Difference, 1982, that are namely the two lips and the mucus, can be considered a first step into the reconstruction of a new symbolism about women against the patriarchal taboos and demonization of female bodily parts considered disturbing and abject. The female body, which does not satisfy the expectations of patriarchal society, is described as monstrous. According to the scholar Barbara Creed, once women rebel to their representations of victims and start to fight back, they unsettle the androcentric perspective and become threatening, in other words, monstrous for men. Most often, female monstrosity is shown through abnormalities and transgression mirroring in their bodies, which become site of rebellion. As an example, the myth of the purported vagina dentata can be mentioned. The ancient archetype owes its name to Sigmund Freud, who aimed at explaining the phenomenon of Kastrationsangst, that is, the castration anxiety. This figure is embodied by a woman having teeth or weapons hidden inside her vagina, able to castrate men during intercourse. For feminists, these female prototypes have been used as symbols of change and rebellion to contrast patriarchy, a revolution that takes advantage precisely of representations of monstrous bodies, through which counter-stereotypes can be created. Particularly subversive female bodies seem to emerge in the novel Primeval and Other Times, 1996, by Olga Tokarczuk, in which she portrays Cornspike, a woman showing her rebellion against the androcentric perspective through her body. Her curious name derives from her habit of eating ears of corn, an unusual activity which, added to other features, makes her an eccentric woman. She lives in a cottage in the woods. She's an outcast of society and a thief. She walks barefoot and has loose morals. First, from a physical point of view, she does not seem to conform to a normative and presumably beautiful body characterized by no physical defects, generally skinny and lean. I quote, Cornspike was big and buxom. She had fair hair and fair complexion that the sun hadn't ruined. She brazenly looked everyone straight in the face, even the priest. She had green eyes, one of which wandered slightly to the side, end quote. This has been an ongoing battle for feminists who have argued that society seems to push women to correspond to a physical perfection according to patriarchal canons, a phenomenon that, for instance, has led to the unscrupulous use of cosmetic surgery, aimed at satisfying the male gaze. In addition to this, sexuality plays a fundamental role in the subversion of patriarchy. Indeed, in the novel, the woman makes use of her own body to get something in exchange for men, such as food or drinks. I quote, Sometimes someone stood her a shot of vodka. Sometimes she got a slice of bread and lard. But people are unwilling to give something for nothing, for free, especially at an inn. So Cornspike started worrying. A little tipsy and warmed up by the vodka, she would go outside with a man and give herself to them for a ring of sausage. And as she was the only woman in the district who was young and easy, the men hung around her like dogs, end quote. Even during the intercourses with men, she seems to evoke distress in them, because she usually openly declares that and demands to adopt a sexual position which does not make her feel inferior, but places her on their same level. I quote, "The men who took Cornspike in the bushes always felt uneasy afterward. They'd button up their flies and go back into the fog inside the tavern with flushed faces. Cornspike never wanted to lie on their back in an honest way. She'd say, 'Why should I lie underneath you? I'm your equal,' end quote." This statement clarifies that a woman is aware of female objectification in the sexual field occurring in a patriarchal society, because sexual relations are conceived to fulfill men's desires, and in that process, a woman is considered a necessary tool to achieve this goal. Here, Cornspike reverses the gender roles and dynamics of power relation, taking on the manly attitude, consisting in asking their lovers to lie underneath her, an inferior symbolic level that provokes their uneasiness. Apart from sexuality, other taboos concerning motherhood are violated by Cornspike. Indeed, after intercourse with a villager, she gets pregnant. In the last weeks before childbirth, she is called by the squire's wife, who offers for help. This apparently kind proposal hides other intentions. I quote, "Mrs. Popielska glanced at her at that large belly. You're going to give birth any day. How do you intend to support yourself? I'll teach you to sew and to cook. You'll even be able to work in the laundry. Who knows, if everything turns out well, you'll be able to keep the baby." But when the squire's wife saw the girl's alien, insolent look as it boldly traveled across the paintings, furniture, and upholstery, she hesitated. And when this gaze moved across the innocent faces of her sons and daughter, she changed her tone. "It is our duty to help our neighbors in need. I run a shelter in Yushkovde. You can hand in the child there. It's clean and very nice there." The word shelter grabbed Cornspike's attention. She looked at the squire's wife. "People don't want you here. You bring confusion and depravity. You are a loose woman. You should go away from here. Aren't I free to be where I want? All this is mine. These are my lands and forest." Cornspike revealed her white teeth in a broad smile. "All yours? You poor skinny little bitch." Mrs. Popielska's face stiffened. "Get out," she said calmly. Cornspike turned around, and now the sound of her bare feet could be heard slapping around the parquet floor. "You whore," said Mrs. Franiova, the chair of the manor, whose husband had been crazy about Cornspike that summer, and slapped her in the face. As Cornspike reeled her way across the coarse gravel in the drive, the carpenters on the roof whistled at her. So she lifted her skirt and showed them her bare behind, end quote. The real purpose of Mrs. Popielska is to take Cornspike's child away and remove her from the village, because she represents a disturbing figure as confirmed by her transgressive and offensive attitude towards the woman. In this passage emerges the complete lack of solidarity among women and the necessity Mrs. Popielska feels to respect the rules and the roles imposed by patriarchy to women to be accepted. The manipulative perspective she's constrained in is transferred to Cornspike, but she refuses to conform to society's expectations, according to which women should know, for instance, how to sew or to cook, as Mrs. Popielka suggests, to be considered proper women. In order to not to adhere to the female stereotype, Cornspike refuses the woman's help and goes back to the woods, her real home, where she gives birth to her dead-born child. Here, the author describes a realistic and dramatic scene of delivery, where the focus is on the woman's suffering body, who thinks is going to die. I quote, "She felt another pain, stronger this time, more terrifying. Now I'm simply going to die," end quote. Here, the ideal of motherhood collapses and is demystified through the representation of pain, suffering, and body changes after delivery, when Cornspike continues to try to feed her baby. I quote, When she awoke, she saw the child beside her, shrunken and dead. She tried to set it to her breast. Her breast was bigger than it, painfully alive, end quote. If in this case Spike's body appears defective according to patriarchal stereotypes, since the woman gives birth to a dead child, and moreover, motherhood is not presented as idyllic, but as a deep disturbance at a psychological and physical level. Later in the novel, Spike gives birth to another child, a girl, who survives delivery. In this case, what is particularly meaningful is that the whole process of giving birth is carried out by the woman alone, who shows her abilities to handle childbirth without other people's help. This can be interpreted as a confirmation of women's powers stepping out of men's control, I quote. At the same time, Spike had just swept the room and squatted down in the corner of her abandoned last year's hay. She had begun to give birth. It took a few minutes. She bore a large, beautiful baby. The room was filled with the scent of mustard, end quote. To conclude, the patriarchal notions of bodies have represented cages from which women have expressed the need to break free. The writer Caroline Heilbronn believed that it is through a narrative that women can be saved from patriarchy. So seems to think Olga Tokarczuk. Many of her radical characters, like Spike, challenges the androcentric perspective, according to which women's body should satisfy men's expectations and desires. Spike, like other rebellious female literary characters, can be regarded as a powerful symbol of revolt, through which narrative can dismantle the patriarchal stereotypes about female bodies. Thank you.